Hello and welcome to Spotlight on the Divorce Expert. And I have an exceptional expert with me here today. I would like to introduce you to Maria Riegger. She's based in the Washington, D.C. area. And believe it or not, she is a banking and corporate attorney who is now a celebrated author, TEDx speaker, and she is a certified inner child reparenting coach and NLP practitioner. And I love this combination because I've heard Maria speak many, many times. She's been on my podcast, she's been on different events, and I really think she offers just such a great way of looking at how we can come from dysfunctional parenting or dysfunctional families of origin and make changes to become exceptional parents, the parents we probably wish we'd have had. So, Maria, welcome.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks so much for having me on. Always enjoy speaking with you.
Well, and I enjoy speaking with you. And I have to say, I was very lucky. I had a great childhood. So I can't speak from this experience. And I know that you have a slightly different story or a very different story on that. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about your background and why this is your area of passion?
Sure. As Marty said, I'm a corporate attorney, practice corporate and banking law currently. I used to practice pro bono family law. So my childhood was, I mean, in some ways it was good. We grew up in the woods. It was a great, in the 80s, it was a great place to grow up environmentally. But I'm the oldest of three kids, and my father unfortunately died in a car accident when I was 11, and my childhood effectively ended that day.
Right.
I had to take care of my siblings and our mom. So our mom raised us. Now my mom has a very traumatic background. She came from a former Eastern Bloc country, had to change. They moved countries. They went to South America, but eventually came to the U.S. So she had a lot of upheaval and turmoil in her life, and she did not parent us effectively. Uh, Basically, we were subject to narcissistic abuse. I've come to terms with the fact that it wasn't all her fault. I think she did the best she could, but she didn't have a lot of insight. And she was raising three kids and working full time on her own. So, I've made peace with all that, but we were not parented effectively. There was a lot of emotional manipulation. She was kind of she could be very intrusive and meshed and engulfing. She could also be extremely dismissive and emotionally negligent. So you never knew who was going to show up, and you never knew. She was also, her behavior was unpredictable. She could get very angry. One time she was upset with us for not picking up toys, so she knocked over a toy shelf, like things like that. So you never knew who was going to show up. So we did not have a lot of emotional consistency as kids. She could not handle any emotion that was not like a neutral emotion,
Okay.
neutral agreeableness. So if you were too happy or too sad, she didn't like it. So we learned early on not to have any needs, not to show too much emotion, things like that. Yes, it was tough, very difficult growing up. We did not get a lot of our developmental needs we have as kids. Everyone has as kids. We did not. My siblings and I did not get those met. So of course that, as I learned later in life, that brings up a whole host of issues into adulthood, which is where my reparenting coaching comes in. So it's very powerful because the reparenting protocols empower the client, the adult, to meet those developmental needs for themselves that they did not get met as children. You can do that even if you didn't get those needs met as kids. You can do that for yourself as an adult. So it comes from a place of empowerment, which is why I love doing this work.
Well, yeah, and your passion comes through loud and clear. And I think, what I see is I see parents who are so stressed right now. Of course, most of the people I work with are very high achieving men and women, but who are struggling with trying to be perfect at work, trying to be, thought leaders and industry leaders and corporate executives and all the other things they're trying to do, and they're really drained. And then they come home and their relationship isn't great with their kids, especially as their kids get a little older. The relationship gets even worse, and then they don't feel good at work and they don't feel good at home, and their relationship is falling apart, and it's just like all the things are happening at once. So I know that you work with a lot of high achieving people as well. Do you think this is specific? Is it kind of specific to this group, or is it just that we notice it more?
I think probably both because everything is, we're so much more interconnected now with social media, and we see what's happening with other people's lives, right? So it's normal that we compare our lives with theirs, right? So that's one thing. Um, I think there's a lot of pressure on parents. There's a lot of pressure on women, on moms especially. And for those of us who, like, I'm in the DC area, it's a very competitive area, a high achieving area. There's a lot of pressure on parents to make sure their kids do all the activities, get the grades to get in the right colleges. So to actually make a conscious decision that you're not going to focus on those, I call them more ego oriented pursuits, that's very powerful. It takes a really strong, secure parent to do that, to make the decision that I'm going to focus on other things. Also, because you mentioned older kids, um, it's tough because when kids become those tween teen ages, they need the parents. They still need the parents. Arguably, they need the parents around more than when they were elementary schoolers. And that's something that parents don't necessarily realize. I didn't a long time ago. My son is almost 16, and I, made the decision several years ago that I could not focus full effort on like my day job, my professional pursuits, and focus full effort at the time on parenting.
Yeah.
So I made the decision. I had him, he needs me. I'm going to put my effort there first, and then, secondarily put effort into other things. So you have to make conscious decisions about that. Otherwise, it's like you say, parents are stretched so thin, nothing is done to completion, or nothing is done well enough in their mind. So you really have to make decisions about where you're going to focus your energy. And it could just be this season, I'm going to focus on the kids, or this season, I'm going to focus on this professional project. I'm not saying that that has to be the rest of your life,
Right.
that focus the rest of your life, but we do have to make conscious decisions about that. That's one of the things I work with parents on, because I tell them, look, if you don't make decisions about where to focus your time and energy, other people make it for you, make those decisions for you by default.
Yeah.
You have to be intentional. Not everybody likes that word, but you have to make decisions, intentional decisions about where to focus your energy, for
Well,
sure.
and I think this is so important. And, it's interesting. I was just talking to Kate Kripke, and she's a psychologist. She deals with motherhood, with women. And one of the things that she's saying is there's such a, like, social media does this, right? We think that we need to be these helicopter and snowplow and all these other descriptors for parents. Like, you have to be on top of your kids 24/7, or you're a bad parent. And, you know, so I get you want your kids to be safe. I'm not suggesting, you can let your kids go run the streets. That's not what I'm saying. But it's funny when you said you grew up and you could go out in the woods. I grew up on a farm. We used to literally take horses with the neighbor kids and sandwiches, and it would be like, be back by dark. And I'm not saying anybody needs to do that because, thankfully nothing bad happened. I mean, there was
Right.
potential, right? But there's potential for bad things to happen, even if mom and dad are standing right beside the child. So, do you think that that adds pressure to these parents?
Absolutely. Yeah, and overparenting can be a real problem. Overparenting, helicopter parenting. And it's funny, I read somewhere recently that parents, they're not involved, and generally speaking, not involved enough in the kids' online activity. And it's almost like, regarding the non-online activities in every other area of life, they helicopter to try to kind of make up for that. But that's not the right approach. We certainly need to be involved in what kids are doing online. I have a teen son, let me tell you, there have to be checks and balances. There have to be frank discussions, parental controls, all that stuff. But kids need the freedom as they get older. They need the freedom to make their own decisions and make their mistakes. Independent support, autonomy support is a developmental need that older children have.
Yeah.
And there is definitely, I see a trend, and this has been going on for a while, of parents wanting, especially moms, wanting to save the kids from making mistakes. Why? I tell parents it's better the kids make mistakes when they're living at home with you and have ready access to guidance and support from parents. They learn, at least they have the experience of learning from the mistakes going through the natural consequences.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's definitely something to be said for that. Allowing them to practice decision making. That's something you have to practice. You don't just get great at making the best decisions or setting boundaries. You have to practice boundary setting. Support with boundary setting is another developmental need that older kids have.
Right.
So yeah, all those things really important.
And I think one of the things that I want to kind of swing this around because I think this is such an interesting idea. Talk about this idea of reparenting your inner child, because I think what we're talking about are techniques and strategies that parents need to have. But if you don't have them internally and you can't do them yourself, you really can't help your child to learn them either.
Exactly. That's precisely why I got the certification, coaching certification, because it's hard to teach your kids, for example, healthy boundaries if you have poor boundaries yourself. So the reparenting protocols, it's as we kind of mentioned earlier, series of protocols to help the client meet the developmental needs that they did not get met in childhood. And sometimes it's maybe a couple developmental needs that didn't get met, or if they had a very traumatic, abusive childhood, it could be a bunch of stuff they didn't get met. So we almost always start with uh, using that observer self technique to try to help you detach. Because a lot of parents, what happens is we get triggered by our kids' developmentally appropriate behavior, and that's our issue to deal with. And if you are too close, if you are not detached enough to really consider the behavior, you're just going to keep getting triggered, right? So we want to use we have different protocols we can put in place to help the client become more detached, to use that observer technique. We want the parent to get curious about the kid's behavior and explore it from this place of more clinical detachment and curiosity. Like, this is interesting. Like, they're upset about this. What is happening here? Because as you and I have talked about this before, all behavior from kids is communication. Kids don't come and tell you, hey, I'm feeling very disconnected from you, or I'm angry because this happened. They're going to engage in this behavior. And the parent's going to, it helps if you can be curious about what is going on here instead of they're misbehaving.
Right.
So that being more of an observer instead of triggered by the action is very helpful. And that it's very powerful once you realize that you've embraced that observer self. Because you see behavior more clearly. You can see patterns, you can anticipate, you can have more autonomy about your own behavior and your response to your kids' behavior. So it's hard to do the rest of the work without mastering that first.
And I know that you and I are both trained in NLP. And one of the factors in NLP is that all behavior serves a purpose. And people are using the behavior because it's helping them. You know, whether you're looking at it and going, this isn't helping me, that doesn't matter as the parent. The child is doing it because whatever they're doing is getting them whatever they want, which may very well be your attention, however they can get it.
Absolutely. I talked to an adult recently, and we were talking about our childhoods, and she told me in high school, I purposely failed an English class to get my dad's attention. She goes, I did all the work, I just didn't turn it in.
Right.
That's an example of using the negative behavior to try to get some attention, right? Because
Right.
kids, even teenagers, won't necessarily go and tell you. They may, but they may not. I'm having a tough time. They'll engage in some behavior, and the parent has to kind of be a detective sometime and figure out, hey, is this going on or this going on? And you always need to, make sure that the kids know that you are available. That's why I tell parents of teens, you need to make sure somebody is available. They don't
Right.
need to be helicoptered over, but when they want to talk, you need to be physically and emotionally available for them. Somebody has to be.
And if most kids want to talk, and I've said this on a bunch of podcasts, when you're trying to get out the door in the morning, when they're already late for something, or when you're really, really busy and trying to get some project finished or something, that's when they want to talk.
Yeah. Or you're going to sleep. That's me. I'm in bed with my book and my kid wants to wants to chat. And that's fine. I'm like, hey, let's chat. That's cool. You have to really take advantage of those moments.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to. And if you're late to some event, but it's because you had this really important conversation, be late to the event. Because if you're not, if you dismiss the bid for connection, you're going to miss very valuable information,
Right.
right? That will help you with the relationship.
Well, and I also think, if a child reaches out and gets shut down, maybe once they're going to, or gets criticized or gets told, we can't do this,
Mhm.
they they may be okay with that. But if it starts happening like 2 or 3 times, they just go like, well, what the heck? I'm not even going
Right.
to bother going. So if they don't
Right.
go to the parent, who do they go to? Right. Probably
Right.
somebody you don't want them going to. So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
so Maria, I really like this idea of the observer a self technique. What how do you get started? Like what kind of mindset or what shift in perception do parents need to focus on to do that? Because it sounds easy, just yeah, I get curious, but
Yeah.
when kids do
Yeah.
something, we get triggered ourselves, right? So
Right.
how do we
Right.
deal with all of that?
Right. The first thing I like to recommend is to get some physical distance. Physical distance, but also mental distance. You can think about it in terms of we could use like a bubble technique. Like you are in a protective bubble. One of my friends uses the visualization of in a sleeping bag. She zips up a sleeping bag and feels more protected, right, from the other person's energy, from the other person's big emotions. I like to get physical distance. I'm going to go to another room. I'm going to use the bathroom. Perfect excuse, right?
Right.
Things like that. It's also helpful if you're having a tough conversation on the phone because of the distance. Some people get triggered. Like I would used to get triggered when there's in person, the conversation is taking place in person. Being on the phone is a great technique to use in the beginning. You may not be able to do this with your kids necessarily, but you may be able to do this with like an intrusive relative or somebody you're
Sure.
trying to have better boundaries with. On the phone, it's easier to kind of maintain those boundaries because they're not there in front of you, right? And you can escape. So that's kind of one of the first things I mentioned is to try to figure out how to put distance, whether it's just a step back. We have in NLP, we have something called the dissociative technique, which I like to use the term detachment, but you literally take a step back and you're putting some physical distance between you and yourself and the person or the situation.
Right.
So yeah, that's something, those are some visualizations, some ideas it may help.
And here's the thing I find. So I'm yes, the NLP I like, but I also did. I was a trainer for critical incident stuff for the Crisis Management Institute, and so one of the things that people do as an adult. When we want kids to do something and kids are starting to get angry with us, we step into them. Like
Hmm.
we make our
Hmm.
physical presence, we use our physicality to sort of become this. I don't want to say bully, but it's sort of like that whole idea of being
Right,
a bully, right? You're
right,
bigger, you're stronger, so this kid's going to do what I say. And that is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be stepping back, especially if your kid's getting angry, because the closer you get, the more that fight or flight response is going to kick in for the kid, right? So
right,
you can quickly develop, you can quickly escalate a situation by stepping in. If some,
right,
especially, even a child, they need
right.
to have their space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And some kids more than others. And then what happens, the kids get older, and then you have an adult-sized kid, like my son is taller, way taller than me, and you're teaching them behavior, and you may see them engage in that behavior with
Right.
you because
Right.
now they're bigger than you. So you definitely don't want to be doing that, right? Yeah, and when kids are oppositional, there are different ways you can handle that. One thing I like to say is if, hey, you need to do this. No. Why not? Just ask what's up with you not wanting to do this, like, and you may get some valuable information. Well, because I'm doing this right now. Okay, when would you be a good time to do this? Later. Later is not going to work because I've noticed when you say later it usually doesn't happen. Please tell me a time you're going to do this. I'll do it at 3. Okay. They're what I've noticed is they're much more willing to do it if they have some input. That's
Right.
just the one example of how to engage with them. So it's not about how do I get my kid to do this. It's like how do I have the relationship where my kid wants to cooperate with me. And that doesn't mean they're going to hop to every time you tell them to do something, but part of that relationship work and learning how to be in relationships and learning how to teach your kid to be in a healthy relationship is to model that behavior for them, is to engage in the back and forth, the one-on-one discourse, negotiation when it's appropriate,
Yeah.
the compromise.
Yeah.
This is all important stuff. So yeah, there
And
may be
I,
things you're not willing to compromise on. You need to make those decisions, but other
yeah.
things you may be able to compromise on.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Sitting down with the child or a teen or a young adult that's living in your house, whoever, or even your spouse, and saying, there's some things that absolutely have to get done. So when I ask you to do these things, I need you to just do them because they have to be done.
Hmm.
Everything else, maybe look at presenting options or saying, there's 5 things that have to get done today. Which one do you want to do first? Like give people that little bit of control, because let's face it, if kids have total control when they get to school, they're going to have problems because that's
Mhm.
not the way the school runs. The school
Right.
runs, I'm the teacher. I say do it, do it.
Right.
That's
Right.
the side. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've seen people who have pulled their kids out of school because they don't like the teachers bossing the kids around. So they
Right.
homeschool them. That's fine. That's their choice. But then the kids get in the workplace
Hmm.
and they can't hold a job
Right.
because I'm
Right.
sorry, when your boss says, do this,
Right.
you don't sit there and have a 2 day negotiation when you're going to
Right.
get it done.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be some structure. Yeah.
Right.
So it's, yeah, not every kid does well in this overly structured school environment. That's for every family to figure out for
Exactly.
themselves.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
fine. And
Yeah.
it's a fact. Girls do better in school because they're able to sit still, and
Right.
boys need more physical activity. That's a fact. So, families can address that, provide more physical activity, a different school environment, homeschooling is an option, all these things.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I mean, there needs to be some structure. So that's the question, right? How to provide the structure and also support the autonomy.
Right, because it is, I mean, even as an entrepreneur, there's things I have to do. Like I have to get tax things in at certain points in the year, and I have to pay my vendors at certain times. Like life is not a free for all. Even if you're running
Yeah.
your own business, it's still not.
Right.
So,
And there are consequences. If you're late with a payment, you have a late fee. It's just
yeah,
that's just life.
yeah, yeah. So, as a parent, I'm going to go back to this because I think this is so fascinating. As a parent or as an adult, how do you know if your inner child needs that reparenting? Because I'm hearing some great strategies and I love them. But let's say you're a parent and you're thinking, well, I'm doing a really damn fine job as a parent. It's all this kid's problem. Like, how do you know if it's your internal problem that you need to deal with?
Great question. I love this. So what usually happens is there are some repeating patterns that come up in the adult's life, and it's almost always in the context of relationships, either with your partner, professional relationships, your relationships with family members, your kids. And there's some repeating pattern that comes up. And the kind of the case you're describing, when kids turn 7, about 7 years old, they start to really individuate and practice their autonomy. And of course, that increases as they get older. And if you have some, developmental needs that need to be addressed, some reparenting needs, negative conditioning, these start to really become apparent during that stage when the kids start to increase their autonomy, they become more oppositional to parents. That's just developmentally appropriate because they're testing boundaries or testing structure to see where the structure is, where the boundaries are, the kind of the parameters in which they can operate in life. And they're so it depends on how the parent is handling this. That's going to happen. They need boundary support. They need all that stuff. Um, so how the parent handles that is very important. If you are constantly battling with your kids, oppositional, you're not enjoying each other's company, there's a lot more negative than positive moments. You maybe need to look at your own behavior, right, first. So, for example, if you have codependency issues like I did, you may need to feel you may have the need to control people's behavior, control environments, control situations. Well, that's not healthy because there are things that are outside of your control. For example, your kids' grades, whether they turn in work, to some extent, that's outside of your control. That has to do with their autonomy. And as we said earlier, sometimes kids engage in the behavior and the act of autonomy in itself has value to them. The subject matter it doesn't really matter what the subject is about or the topic of the situation or the conversation. The act of them just being in opposition to protect their autonomy has value because they're protecting their autonomy and asserting their independence. So, for example, parents, like I'm a very logical parent. This doesn't make sense to me, but it's not about that. It's about the kids meeting their developmental needs.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely the patterns you want to pay attention to. Other patterns, poor boundaries, not being able to say no, fearing the other person's reaction or being afraid when you assert your own boundaries. That's a
Right.
big indicator that you have some work to do. Self-sabotage in professional and personal relationships, that comes up a lot. It's usually linked to like feelings of unworthiness, chronic unworthiness from childhood.
Right.
Maybe you didn't feel good enough. Maybe your parents tied your self-worth to grades. That was a big thing in my family. Like you were only as good as like your performance, right?
Right.
So that could be another indicator of some reparenting needs for sure.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you. And you know, we can all see ourselves, I think, in some of those. So it's not that you maybe have one of these issues, but if you may have a bunch, or you may only have one, but that's causing you a whole bunch of problems with your kids. So it's not really like you have to have 4 out of 5 of these symptoms, and there's
Right,
no diagnosis, right? So
right,
even if you just wanted to learn how to be a better parent, this reparenting, I think, would be really reparenting your inner child would be
right.
fantastic. Maria, you have kindly offered a gift for anybody listening in who wants to grab this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I have a boundaries for parents intensive course, and I have a boundaries masterclass that I'm happy to do to give for free if you're interested in that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And all of that information will be in the chat underneath this video. Maria, if people want to find out more about what you do, what's the best way to connect?
Sure thing. So my direct email is maria@lawschoolheretic.com. My booking link is at lawschoolheretic.com. You can click on a work with me and book a free informational session if you're interested in finding out more about this and how I can support you. And I have on demand classes on boundaries and co-parenting available there as well.
Wonderful. And Maria is just a fantastic resource. I'm serious. Contact her, reach out, take a session, and you're going to learn stuff because she's going to be able to customize. You know, when you're talking on a YouTube video, you're kind of sharing everything to everybody. When you have those one-on-one calls, you can really address specific things. So, Maria, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciated you sharing all your knowledge and wisdom and expertise.
Thanks, Marty. Happy to be here.
And I want to thank everybody for watching and listening to this YouTube video. Don't forget, like and subscribe, and keep coming back for more Spotlight on the Divorce Experts.